William Hawthorne was a man whose reputation preceded him. A self-made tycoon, his name was synonymous with power, wealth, and unparalleled business acumen. From the towering skyscrapers that bore his company's name to the luxury brands that defined elite lifestyles, William had built an empire that made him a legend. Every decision he made was calculated, every risk measured, and every victory celebrated as a testament to his unmatched ambition. But while the world admired and envied him, there was only one thing in his life that truly mattered: his son, Theodore. Theodore had been the center of William's world from the day he was born. As a widower who had lost his wife during childbirth, William devoted himself entirely to raising his son. He spared no expense, ensuring Theodore received the best education, the finest mentors, and every opportunity money could buy. William dreamed that one day, his son would take over the empire he had painstakingly built. Yet, as the years passed, William watched with a heavy heart as his son grew distant. The once cheerful and compassionate Theodore had become arrogant, entitled, and indifferent. While William had built his empire from the ground up, Theodore took their wealth for granted, living a life of luxury without ever lifting a finger to earn it. He surrounded himself with shallow friends, flaunted his status, and dismissed the values of hard work and integrity his father had tried so hard to instill in him. William was no longer just disappointed, he was deeply troubled. One sleepless night, as William sat in his study, staring out the window at the city skyline, a painful thought consumed him. Had he failed as a father? Had his success blinded him to the damage his wealth had caused? The empire he had built for Theodore's future now seemed like a burden, one that had stripped his son of empathy and humility. The question haunted him: did Theodore truly care for him, or was he merely an extension of the fortune he stood to inherit? Determined to find answers, William devised an extraordinary plan. He decided to vanish from his son's life, abandoning his wealth, his mansion, and his identity. He would live as an ordinary man, blending into the shadows, to see if Theodore would notice his absence or care enough to search for him. It was a drastic step, but William saw no other way to uncover the truth about his son's heart. The next morning, William left a letter with his attorney instructing him to manage the company in his absence. He packed a small bag with only the bare essentials: a few changes of clothes, a pair of sturdy shoes, and just enough cash to survive for a few weeks. As he stood at the gates of his sprawling estate, he took one last look at the life he was leaving behind. For the first time in decades, William felt both fear and clarity. This was not just a test for Theodore, it was a test for himself as a father. For weeks, William wandered the streets of the city, far removed from the luxurious world he once knew. His tailored suits were replaced with second-hand clothes, his polished shoes scuffed and worn. He slept in shelters, ate at soup kitchens, and learned the rhythms of life on the margins. The experience was humbling, but it also opened his eyes to a world he had never truly seen, a world of resilience, kindness, and struggle. From time to time, William would observe Theodore from a distance. His son's life appeared unchanged, filled with extravagant parties, expensive cars, and high-end restaurants. Theodore showed no signs of concern or distress over his father's disappearance. Instead, he seemed to thrive in his newfound freedom, basking in the adoration of his social circle. One day, William decided to test his son's character more directly. Disguised as a homeless man, he positioned himself outside one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, a place Theodore frequented with his wealthy friends. As Theodore arrived, laughing and surrounded by a group of executives, William approached him hesitantly. "Theodore," he called out, his voice shaky but firm. Theodore turned, his smile fading as he took in the sight of the disheveled man before him. There was no recognition in his eyes, only disdain. "Do I know you?" he asked coldly. "It's me, your father," William said, his heart pounding in his chest. "What?" Theodore's expression darkened. "This isn't funny," he snapped. "I don't have time for games." Before William could respond, Theodore turned on his heel and walked away, leaving his father standing alone in the cold. The rejection cut deeper than William had expected. He had hoped, even in his son's arrogance, that there might be a flicker of concern or curiosity. Instead, he was met with indifference, a stark confirmation of his worst fears. Crushed, But resolute, William decided it was time to take the next step. He contacted his attorney Jonathan and gave him a shocking directive to rewrite his will. Reduce Theodore's inheritance to the bare minimum, he instructed, enough for him to survive, but not to thrive. Jonathan hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the request. "Are you sure about this, William? It's unprecedented." "I've never been more certain," William replied. "This is the only way he'll learn." William also hired a private investigator, Clara, to dig into Theodore's activities. The results were devastating. Theodore had been using the family's name to manipulate clients, exploit employees, and engage in shady business deals. He had betrayed not only his father's trust, but also the integrity of the company. The revelations left William heartbroken, but they also steeled his resolve. He decided to confront Theodore one final time. When Theodore arrived at the mansion, he was surprised to find his father waiting for him. William had shed his disguise and returned to the life he had temporarily left behind, though the experience had forever changed him. He motioned for Theodore to sit at the dining table, the same table where they had shared countless meals during Theodore's childhood. "You've failed me," William began, his voice steady but laced with pain. "I gave you everything: love, guidance, opportunity, and you've squandered it all." Theodore scoffed, his arrogance undiminished. "I've worked hard for everything I have." "No," William countered, his tone sharp. "You were handed everything, and you've betrayed not just me, but the values I tried to teach you." William slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents outlining the changes to Theodore's inheritance. As Theodore read, his face paled. "You can't do this," he said, his voice rising. "This isn't fair." "I already have," William replied, his voice breaking. "This is the last lesson I'll ever teach you. From this moment on, you're on your own. Build your own life, if you're capable." Enraged, Theodore stormed out of the mansion, vowing never to return. But as he left, William felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, in losing everything, Theodore would finally understand the true value of family, integrity, and hard work. As the sound of Theodore's footsteps faded from the mansion, an eerie silence engulfed the grand estate. William remained seated at the dining table, staring at the empty seat his son had vacated. A surge of emotions overwhelmed him: anger, sadness, regret, but above all, a faint glimmer of hope. He didn't know whether his decision would break Theodore or rebuild him, but he was willing to take that risk. His son had to learn, even if it meant losing everything. William spent the following days reflecting on his own journey. He had started with nothing: no safety nets, no luxuries, and certainly no inheritance to fall back on. His empire had been forged through countless failures, sleepless nights, and sheer determination. He wondered if his son, stripped of his entitlement, could rise from the ashes in the same way. Would Theodore find the strength to face his reality, or would he crumble under the weight of his choices? Despite his newfound resolve, William couldn't ignore the nagging feeling of guilt. Had he been too harsh? Was there still a way to guide Theodore without pushing him to the brink? These questions lingered, but William knew there was no turning back now. The wheels were already in motion. Meanwhile, Theodore's world was unraveling faster than he could comprehend. He stormed out of the mansion, furious at his father's audacity, but his anger soon gave way to panic. For the first time in his life, he felt truly vulnerable. The safety net that had always cushioned his reckless decisions was gone. Calls to his lawyer confirmed the worst. His access to the family fortune had been revoked. His accounts were frozen, his credit cards declined, and his lavish lifestyle came to an abrupt halt. Theodore's so-called friends, who had once flocked to his side for exclusive parties and expensive gifts, began to disappear. Invitations stopped arriving. Calls went unanswered. His social circle dissolved as quickly as it had formed, leaving Theodore isolated and alone. He quickly learned that loyalty in his world was conditional, tied not to genuine relationships, but to the perks of wealth and privilege. He had many excellent friends, but to the last, his friendship with Laura, Maxwell, and Jennifer had been the least exciting to her. Desperation set in. Theodore tried to salvage his failing ventures, but without his father's name or resources, he found himself in over his head. Business partners abandoned him, clients demanded refunds, and legal troubles loomed. The once confident man who had walked into every room with an air of superiority now found himself humbled, scrambling to stay afloat. One evening, Theodore sat alone in his penthouse apartment, staring out at the city skyline. The lights that once symbolized his success now felt distant and unattainable. His thoughts drifted back to his father's words. "This is the last lesson I'll ever teach you. Build your own life, if you're capable." For the first time, Theodore questioned himself. Was he truly capable of building something on his own? Had he relied so heavily on his father's wealth that he had never developed the skills or character to succeed independently? The realization was sobering. But it also ignited a small spark of determination. If his father wanted him to prove himself, then that's exactly what he would do. Theodore's first challenge was finding a place to live. With his accounts frozen and his penthouse lease overdue, he was forced to vacate. Carrying a single suitcase filled with his remaining belongings, he moved into a modest studio apartment in a less affluent part of the city. The transition was jarring. Gone were the marble floors and panoramic views, replaced by peeling wallpaper and the distant hum of traffic. He quickly discovered that his new reality required sacrifices. Meals became simple and frugal. Nights once spent at exclusive clubs were now spent scouring job boards and drafting resumes. Theodore had never held a traditional job before, and the prospect of starting at the bottom was daunting, but he knew he had no other choice. After weeks of rejection, Theodore finally secured a position as a junior sales associate at a small tech startup. The job was far from glamorous, and the salary barely covered his rent, but it was a start. For the first time in his life, Theodore experienced the grind of a 9-to-5 job. He woke up early, commuted on crowded buses, and navigated office politics. The work was challenging, and his inexperience often left him frustrated, but he was determined to prove himself. As the weeks turned into months, Theodore began to notice a change within himself. The entitlement that had once defined him started to fade. He developed a newfound respect for the people around him, colleagues who worked tirelessly to support their families, customers who struggled to make ends meet, and even strangers who offered small acts of kindness without expecting anything in return. One evening, as he walked home from work, Theodore passed a soup kitchen. The sight of people lined up for a hot meal reminded him of the stories his father used to tell about his own struggles. On a whim, Theodore decided to volunteer. He spent the evening serving meals, listening to the stories of those less fortunate, and gaining a deeper understanding of the hardships many people faced daily. It was during one of these volunteer shifts that Theodore met Emma, a single mother who worked tirelessly to provide for her young daughter. Despite her challenges, Emma exuded a warmth and resilience that Theodore found inspiring. The two struck up a friendship, and Emma's perspective on life began to influence Theodore in ways he hadn't anticipated. She taught him the value of gratitude, the importance of community, and the strength that came from overcoming adversity. Meanwhile, William kept a watchful eye on his son's progress. Through discreet updates from Clara, the private investigator, he learned of Theodore's struggles and small victories. William was careful not to interfere, knowing that Theodore needed to navigate this journey on his own. However, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of pride as he saw glimpses of the man his son was becoming. One day, Clara shared a particularly moving update. She had observed Theodore volunteering at the soup kitchen, interacting with people from all walks of life with genuine compassion and humility. It was a far cry from the arrogant young man William had confronted months earlier. For the first time, William felt a flicker of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, his drastic measures had not been in vain. But the journey was far from over. One final test remained. Several months later, Theodore was presented with an opportunity to pitch a business idea to a group of investors. It was a chance to prove himself, not just to his father, but to himself. Theodore poured everything he had into the project, drawing on the lessons he had learned during his time at the tech startup. He worked late into the night, refining his pitch, crunching numbers, and preparing for every possible question the investors might ask. The day of the pitch arrived, and Theodore stood before the panel of investors, his heart pounding in his chest. As he spoke, he realized that he was no longer the man who had relied on his father's name to open doors. He was someone who had faced failure, learned from it, and emerged stronger. The investors listened intently, nodding in approval, as Theodore outlined his vision with passion and clarity. To his astonishment, the panel agreed to fund his project. Theodore felt a surge of pride, not because of the money, but because he had earned it through his own hard work. He left the meeting with a sense of accomplishment he had never experienced before, a sense that he was finally building something of his own. That evening, Theodore returned to the soup kitchen where Emma and her daughter were waiting. He shared the news with them, and their joy was infectious. For the first time in a long time, Theodore felt a sense of belonging, a connection to something greater than himself. He realized that his journey had been about more than proving himself to his father. It had been about discovering his own worth and understanding the values that truly mattered. As Theodore walked home that night, he thought about his father. The anger and resentment he had once felt were gone, replaced by gratitude and a deep desire to make amends. He didn't know if William would ever forgive him, but he was determined to try. In the quiet solitude of his study, William sat by the fireplace, a glass of scotch in hand. The mansion felt emptier than ever, but his heart was lighter. He had seen the changes in Theodore, the growth that had come from hardship, and he knew that his son was finally on the right path. The road ahead would still be difficult, but William had faith that Theodore would continue to rise to the challenge. As he stared into the flickering flames, a knock at the door broke the silence. William turned, his heart skipping a beat. Standing in the doorway was Theodore, his face a mixture of nervousness and resolve. "Dad," Theodore said softly, "I need to talk to you." William set down his glass and motioned for his son to sit. For the first time in years, they faced each other not as adversaries, but as two men ready to rebuild what had been broken. And so, their journey of reconciliation began. Theodore sat across from William in the same dining room where months earlier their confrontation had shattered their fragile relationship. But this time, the atmosphere was different. There was no anger, no arrogance, just a quiet tension and a shared understanding that the road to reconciliation would not be an easy one. William's gaze softened as he noticed the subtle changes in his son's demeanor. Theodore's posture was no longer rigid with entitlement, but grounded with humility. His clothes, though clean and neat, were simple and stark contrast to the designer seats he once wore. But what struck William the most was the look in his son's eyes. Gone was the hollow confidence that masked insecurity. In its place was something deeper, determination, and perhaps even regret. And so the thought was stranger to Carl. His last words, though using language laced with insecurity, his spirit, instead, his words. "I wasn't sure you'd come," William said, breaking the silence. Theodore took a deep breath. "I wasn't sure you'd let me in," he admitted. He hesitated, searching for the right words. "Dad, I need to apologize for everything." William raised an eyebrow, waiting for his son to continue. "I took everything for granted. Your hard work, your love, even your name. I thought the world owed me something because of who you were, but I was wrong. I see that now." Theodore's voice wavered, but he pressed on. "I've made mistakes, a lot of them, and I hurt you in ways I can't take back. But I want to make things right, if you'll let me." For a moment, William said nothing. He studied his son, weighing his words and the sincerity behind them. Finally, he spoke. "Theodore, rebuilding trust isn't something that happens overnight. It takes time, effort, and consistency. Are you prepared for that?" "I am," Theodore replied without hesitation. "I don't expect forgiveness right away, but I'll do whatever it takes to earn it." William nodded, his heart swelling with a cautious sense of hope. "Then, let's begin." Over the next few weeks, William and Theodore embarked on a journey to rebuild their relationship. It wasn't easy. Years of misunderstandings and unspoken resentment didn't simply disappear, but for the first time in a long time, they were both willing to try. William invited Theodore to join him at the community center he had recently started supporting. The center provided resources for underprivileged families, including job training, childcare, and food assistance. It was a cause close to William's heart, inspired by his time living among the homeless. He wanted Theodore to see the world through a different lens, a lens not clouded by privilege. At first, Theodore felt out of place. The people at the center were nothing like the corporate executives and socialites he was used to. But as he spent more time volunteering, he began to connect with the stories of resilience and struggle. He helped an elderly man learn how to use a computer to apply for jobs. He played soccer with kids who dreamed of brighter futures. Slowly but surely, Theodore started to see the value of giving back. One afternoon, Theodore found himself sitting with a young boy named Luis, who was struggling with his homework. Luis's mother worked multiple jobs and couldn't always help him with his studies. Theodore took the time to explain the math problems step by step, and when Luis finally solved a particularly tricky equation, his face lit up with pride. "Thanks, Monsieur Theodore," Luis exclaimed, beaming. Theodore smiled, feeling a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. "You did the hard work, Luis. I just helped a little." Later that evening, Theodore shared the moment with his father. "I think I get it now," he said. "It's not about how much you have. It's about what you can do for others." William placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "That's a lesson I had to learn the hard way too." While their relationship was healing, William also wanted to ensure that Theodore was ready to re-enter the world of business, but on his own terms. He offered to mentor Theodore, not as a father, but as a seasoned entrepreneur. Together they reviewed Theodore's business idea, refining the pitch and addressing potential weaknesses. William was impressed by his son's passion and the thoughtfulness he had poured into the project. But William didn't make it easy. He challenged Theodore at every turn, asking tough questions and pushing him to think critically. "If you're gonna succeed," William said, "you need to anticipate obstacles and adapt. No one is gonna hand you anything." Theodore took the feedback in stride, determined to prove himself. When the time came to present his business to a larger group of investors, he felt more prepared than ever. The pitch was a success, and Theodore secured additional funding. For the first time, he felt like he had earned his accomplishments through his own merit. As Theodore's confidence grew, so did his relationship with Emma. The two had become close friends during their time volunteering at the soup kitchen, but their bond had deepened into something more. Emma admired the man Theodore was becoming, the humility he displayed, the effort he put into bettering himself, and the genuine kindness he showed to others. One evening, as they sat on a park bench, watching Emma's daughter play on the swings, Theodore opened up about his journey. "I used to think success was about having more money, more power, more recognition. But now, I see it differently. It's about making a difference, even in small ways." Emma smiled. "You've come a long way, Theodore. And you're not done yet. But for now," their relationship blossomed, and Emma became a source of strength and inspiration for Theodore. She encouraged him to stay grounded, reminding him of the values he had learned during his transformation. Together, they began to envision a future built on love, integrity, and shared purpose. But not everyone was pleased with Theodore's new direction. Among those who had profited from his old ways were a group of former associates who had been involved in his shady dealings. With Theodore no longer willing to participate in their schemes, their own ventures began to suffer. Resentful and desperate, they devised a plan to sabotage Theodore's fledgling business. One evening, as Theodore prepared for a critical meeting with a potential partner, he received an anonymous email containing false accusations against him. The email threatened to ruin his reputation if he didn't comply with their demands. Theodore was shaken, but refused to give in. He reached out to his father for advice. "This is the price of integrity," William said. "When you stand for something, there will always be people who try to bring you down, but you have to stay true to your values." With his father's support, Theodore confronted the situation head-on. He hired a legal team to address the threats and reached out to his potential partner to explain the situation. His honesty and transparency not only diffused the crisis, but also earned him respect. As the months passed, Theodore's business grew steadily. It wasn't the massive empire his father had built, but it was meaningful, and it was his. He continued to volunteer at the community center, balancing his professional ambitions with his commitment to giving back. His relationship with William flourished, built on mutual respect and shared experiences. One day, as Theodore stood in the community center's garden, watching the children play, William approached him. "You've made me proud, Theodore," he said. "Not because of your business or your success, but because of the man you've become." Theodore turned to his father, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad. Thank you for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." For the first time in years, they embraced not as a father and a wayward son, but as equals who had weathered life's trials and come out stronger. Their journey had been painful and uncertain, but it had brought them to this moment, a moment of reconciliation, growth, and hope for the future. Together, they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that their bond was unbreakable. As the weeks turned into months, Theodore's life began to take on a new rhythm, one of balance, purpose, and growth. His business was gaining traction, his personal relationships were strengthening, and his bond with William deepened with every passing day. Yet, even as things improved, Theodore couldn't shake the feeling that he had one final step to take before he could truly move forward. It was a crisp autumn morning when Theodore stood outside the towering skyscraper that once housed Hawthorne Enterprises headquarters. He hadn't stepped foot in the building since his father had cut him off, and now, standing there again, he felt a strange mix of nostalgia and apprehension. This building had been a symbol of everything he had lost, and everything he now hoped to reclaim, not as an entitled heir, but as someone worthy of his father's trust. Inside, he met with Clara, the private investigator who had been instrumental in exposing his past mistakes. Clara greeted him with a knowing smile. "I had a feeling I'd see you here eventually," she said. "What can I do for you, Theodore?" "I want to make amends," Theodore replied. "Not just with my father, but with everyone I've hurt. The people I manipulated, the clients I misled. I can't change what I've done, but I want to make things right." Clara nodded, her expression serious. "That's a tall order. Some of those bridges may be beyond repair." "I understand," Theodore said, "but I have to try." Over the next several weeks, Theodore set out on what would become one of the most challenging journeys of his life. With Clara's help, he tracked down former clients and colleagues who had been wronged by his actions. Some were receptive to his apologies, while others were understandably skeptical. Theodore didn't shy away from their anger or disappointment. Instead, he listened, acknowledged their pain, and offered restitution where possible. One of the most difficult encounters was with a man named Robert, a small business owner whose company had nearly gone bankrupt after falling victim to one of Theodore's schemes. Robert was hesitant to meet with him, but Theodore persisted, eventually convincing him to sit down for a conversation. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Theodore said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "What I did to you was wrong, and I take full responsibility for it. If there's any way I can help you rebuild, I want to do it." Robert studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, "You've got guts coming here, I'll give you that. But words only go so far. If you're serious about helping, let's see what you can do." Theodore threw himself into the task, using his business expertise to help Robert secure new clients and stabilize his finances. Over time, their relationship shifted from one of animosity to one of mutual respect. By the time Robert's business was back on solid ground, he and Theodore had formed an unlikely friendship. But while Theodore worked to make amends, he also continued to grow his own business. But his success wasn't just about profits or market share. It was about creating a company that reflected his newfound values. He implemented ethical practices, prioritized employee well-being, and partnered with organizations that aligned with his mission to give back to the community. One day, Theodore approached his father with an idea. "Dad, I've been thinking. The community center has done so much good, but it's limited by funding and resources. What if we expanded it? We could create a network of centers across the city, offering job training, childcare, and support services to those who need it most." William's eyes lit up with pride. "That's an ambitious goal," he said, "but I think it's exactly the kind of legacy we should be building." Together, they began working on the project, pooling their resources and expertise to bring the vision to life. The process was challenging, but it also brought them closer together, giving them a shared purpose that went beyond their personal reconciliation. As the first new center prepared to open its doors, Theodore and William stood side by side at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The event was attended by community leaders, local families, and even some of Theodore's former critics, who had come to see the man he had become. When it was Theodore's turn to speak, he stepped up to the podium, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked out at the crowd, his gaze settling on his father, Emma, and Clara, all of whom had played pivotal roles in his transformation. "Not long ago, I was someone who took more than I gave," Theodore began. "I thought success was measured by how much you could accumulate, money, power, recognition, but life has a way of teaching you what truly matters, often in ways you don't expect. For me, that lesson came from losing everything, and from the people who believed in me, even when I didn't deserve it." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. This center represents more than just a place to help those in need. It represents a second chance, a chance to build something meaningful, to give back, and to honor the values my father worked so hard to teach me. The crowd erupted in applause, but Theodore's eyes were fixed on William, who gave him a small nod of approval. In that moment, Theodore knew he had finally earned his father's respect, not as an heir, but as a man. As the months passed, the network of community centers grew, each one becoming a beacon of hope for those in need. Theodore's business continued to thrive, but he remained committed to his mission of giving back. He often spent his evenings at the centers, mentoring young entrepreneurs, volunteering with families, and sharing his story in the hopes of inspiring others to overcome their own challenges. One evening, as he walked through one of the centers, he noticed a young woman sitting alone, her face etched with worry. He approached her and introduced himself, learning that her name was Maria and that she was struggling to balance work, school, and caring for her younger siblings. "You're not alone in this," Theodore said gently. "There are people here who want to help, myself included." Over the following weeks, Theodore worked with Maria to develop a plan that would allow her to manage her responsibilities while pursuing her goals. He connected her with mentors, helped her secure a scholarship, and ensured her siblings had access to after-school programs. Watching Maria's confidence grow reminded Theodore of his own journey and the people who had helped him along the way. As Theodore's life flourished, so did his relationship with Emma. Their bond deepened with each passing day, and it wasn't long before Theodore realized he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. On a quiet evening in the park where they had first shared their dreams, Theodore knelt down on one knee and proposed. Emma's tearful yes marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one built on love, trust, and shared purpose. Their wedding was a modest affair, held at one of the community centers that had become so central to their lives. Surrounded by family, friends, and the people they had touched through their work, Theodore and Emma exchanged vows that reflected the values they now held dear. William, standing beside his son as his best man, couldn't have been prouder. As he watched Theodore and Emma dance under the twinkling lights, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had led to this moment, a moment of redemption, love, and hope for the future. Exercise. The word just began to transform his soul. In the years that followed, Theodore continued to grow as a leader, a husband, and a father. He and Emma welcomed 2 children, and Theodore was determined to raise them with the values he had learned through his transformation. He often shared stories of his past mistakes, hoping to teach his children the importance of humility, hard work, and compassion. William, now retired, spent his days mentoring young entrepreneurs and reflecting on the legacy he had built, not just through his empire, but through the man his son had become. Together, he and Theodore worked to expand their network of community centers, ensuring that their mission of giving back would continue for generations to come. And so, the story of William and Theodore Hawthorne came full circle, a tale of redemption, growth, and the enduring power of family. Their journey was far from over, but they faced the future with open hearts, knowing that they had already overcome life's greatest challenges together. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, there's another must-see video on screen now. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss out on more incredible content. Life